You need to get rid of this junk. It's a violation of HOA Code 9B. Those were the first words Karen barked at my 88-year-old father as she glared down at the display case in his living room. I still remember the shock in his tired eyes as he clutched his precious war medals, symbols of decades of sacrifice and honor, while Karen, the self-appointed enforcer of our community's bland rules, dismissed them as worthless clutter. In that moment, something inside me snapped. How could a woman with no understanding of history or sacrifice reduce a lifetime of valor to mere junk in her eyes? My father had served our country in wars that shaped history. Each medal represented courage, loss, and the unwavering spirit of a hero. And here was Karen, armed with her clipboard and an unyielding obsession with uniformity, demanding that he throw away his legacy because it didn't fit the sanitized aesthetic of our neighborhood. It was a moment of unbearable injustice, and I knew then that we were not going to take it lying down. That night, while the rest of the community slept under the illusion of suburban perfection, I sat with my father and listened to the quiet hum of his memories. The medals, though labeled as junk by Karen, shone with stories of bravery and sacrifice that no HOA rule could ever define. With a heavy heart and burning determination, I vowed that his legacy would be celebrated, not hidden away or dismissed by someone who cared only about appearances. I began to hatch a plan that was as audacious as it was heartfelt. If Karen could belittle my father's honors, then I would show the entire community the true worth of that legacy. I decided that the only fitting response was to transform his living room into a tribute to real heroes. I reached out to anyone who would listen, from old friends in the veterans community to local civic leaders, and set my plan in motion. The stakes were high. It wasn't just about medals, but about the right to honor our past, to preserve memories that define generations. And then the unthinkable happened. The local mayor, a man known for his integrity and deep respect for military service, learned of the incident. Outraged by Karen's callous dismissal, he decided that my father's sacrifices should be celebrated in public. That very weekend, the mayor announced an impromptu heroes parade in our neighborhood, a public event that would honor every veteran, with my father as the guest of honor. In that electrifying moment, as the city rallied to salute a true hero, Karen's petty enforcement was laid bare for all to see. This was not just a personal victory. It was a declaration that true honor cannot be suppressed by bureaucratic whims. And as the parade lights flickered on in the cool dawn, the sound of marching bands filled the air, a symphony of respect for a legacy that no one could dismiss as junk. Cedar Crest, our upscale suburban community, was renowned for its immaculate lawns, perfectly aligned houses, and an unspoken pact of conformity. Every resident was expected to adhere to a strict code of aesthetics, enforced with an iron fist by the local homeowners association, HOA. At the heart of this regime was Karen Mitchell, a woman in her early 50s, impeccably dressed, with a perpetual frown and a clipboard that she wielded like a weapon. Karen had become infamous in Cedar Crest for her ruthless interpretation of the rules. To her, every deviation from the bland, uniform standard was a personal affront that had to be corrected immediately. My father, on the other hand, was a living relic of a bygone era, a proud veteran whose life had been defined by duty and sacrifice. At 88 years old, he carried the scars and medals of wars he fought long ago. His living room was a shrine to his service, walls adorned with photographs, and a display case housing his war medals, each one a testament to bravery and the cost of freedom. These medals were not just metal and ribbons. They were symbols of honor, each telling a story of camaraderie, loss, and triumph over adversity. I had grown up listening to my father's tales of courage and resilience. His stories were woven into the fabric of our family's history and had instilled in me a deep respect for the sacrifices made by those who serve. So when Karen, with her narrow view of aesthetics, declared that his treasured medals were junk, it struck at the very core of our values. Cedar Crest was a community divided by contrasting ideals. While many residents dutifully followed the HOA's rigid guidelines, There was an undercurrent of dissent among those who believed that true beauty lay in diversity and authenticity. My father's modest home, nestled at the edge of the neighborhood, stood as a quiet rebellion against the sanitized perfection that Karen and her ilk promoted. It was a place where the stories of the past were honored, and where personal legacy held more value than a mere facade of uniformity. Karen's disdain for anything that deviated from her idea of order was well known. Over the years, she had fined residents for minor infractions: a stray garden gnome, a slightly overgrown hedge, or even a decorative piece that didn't match the predetermined color scheme. But nothing could have prepared her for the day she encountered my father's war medals. To her, they were outdated relics that disrupted the visual harmony of the neighborhood. To us, they were priceless reminders of sacrifice and honor. When Karen's harsh words echoed through my father's living room that fateful day, I could see the hurt in his eyes, a look that spoke of memories far more valuable than any material possession. It was then that I decided to fight back, not with anger alone, but with a plan that would honor his legacy and expose the hypocrisy of a system that valued conformity over courage. Determined to reclaim the narrative, I reached out to the local Veterans Association, community organizers, and even the mayor himself. I gathered testimonials, historical records, and heartfelt messages from fellow veterans and neighbors. I planned a public celebration, a heroes parade that would shine a light on the true meaning of honor. This wasn't just a personal vendetta. It was a stand for every individual who believed that history, sacrifice, and personal legacy were worth celebrating, no matter how much they disrupted the glossy veneer of suburban uniformity. As the plan took shape, the tension in Cedar Crest grew palpable. Neighbors whispered their support, and digital petitions sprang up, calling for the HOA to reconsider its oppressive policies. The stage was set for a dramatic showdown between an old warrior's legacy and the rigid, out-of-touch standards enforced by Karen Mitchell. And as the first hints of change stirred in the community, it became clear that this battle would be about much more than a simple dispute. It would be a reclaiming of our collective history and a resounding declaration that true honor cannot be dismissed as junk. The conflict escalated swiftly after Karen's callous dismissal of my father's war medals. It began with a series of HOA memos that cited visual pollution and non-compliance with modern aesthetic standards as reasons for fining my father's household. The fines were astronomical, amounting to tens of thousands of dollars, an absurd sum meant to force him to remove his cherished collection. I knew that no amount of money could ever replace the stories and sacrifices embodied by those medals. But Karen was relentless, and each memo, each fine, further fueled the fire of resistance within me. I decided that I could not allow this injustice to stand. I began by gathering every scrap of evidence, scans of the memos, detailed logs of the fines, and, most importantly, recorded interviews with neighbors who, though fearful, shared their own grievances about the HOA's intrusive policies. The community's simmering frustration was palpable, and soon a digital dossier began to circulate on local social media channels under hashtags like #MedalsNotJunk and #HonorOurHeroes. Every piece of evidence painted a picture of a community under siege, not by external threats, but by the internal tyranny of a bureaucrat who saw nothing more than a relic in my father's awards. At the same time, I reached out to the local Veterans Association. I recounted the incident to old comrades and learned that many in our community had faced similar insults, albeit on a smaller scale. The outrage was not just mine. It was shared by a group of citizens who revered their history and the sacrifices that defined them. With their support, I drafted a plan that was as strategic as it was symbolic, a public heroes parade that would honor not only my father's legacy, but also the contributions of all veterans at Cedar Crest. The planning was meticulous. I coordinated with the Veterans Association to schedule a parade, secure permission from local authorities, and even persuaded the mayor to attend. Behind the scenes, the movement gathered momentum. Neighbors began to display signs of solidarity. Banners, bumper stickers, and even social media profiles proudly proclaiming support for veterans' rights and creative freedom. My digital petition calling for a reevaluation of the HOA's policies garnered thousands of signatures, and soon the message was clear. Cedar Crest was ready to stand up against arbitrary enforcement. Karen, of course, did not sit idly by. She fired off angry emails to the HOA board, insisting that my father's display was a blatant violation of the community's rules. In one particularly vitriolic message, she wrote, "This is not a museum for outdated war memorabilia. It is a residence that must conform to the standards of modern living." Her words stung deeply, not only for what they said about my father, but for the broader implications about how history and sacrifice were being devalued in our community. The tension reached a fever pitch when the HOA board scheduled an emergency meeting to address the growing controversy. I attended the meeting, armed with my digital dossier and the support of several outspoken neighbors. I presented my case calmly but forcefully, explaining that my father's war medals were not only legally displayed, but were a vital part of our community's heritage. I argued that fining someone for honoring their past was not only unjust, but a direct attack on the values that had built our community. The room was divided. While a few board members defended Karen's strict interpretations, many others began to see the absurdity of it all. Throughout this period, I also received an unexpected boost. The local mayor, a man with a deep appreciation for our history, publicly denounced the HOA's actions. In a widely circulated statement, he declared that my father's medals were a source of pride and that every veteran deserved to be honored. "Our heroes," he said, "should be celebrated, not shamed by petty bureaucrats." This statement ignited a firestorm of public support, and soon, every discussion in Cedar Crest echoed with the rallying cry for change. My plan for the Heroes Parade took on new urgency. I coordinated with local media, secured endorsements from community leaders, and even organized small pre-parade rallies that featured impromptu speeches by veterans and supporters alike. The anticipation was electric, and it seemed that every resident in Cedar Crest was ready to reclaim our heritage from the clutches of arbitrary rules. The digital momentum was undeniable. Every shared video, every hashtag, every supportive comment reinforced the idea that my father's honor was non-negotiable. Amid the growing storm, I also prepared for a final confrontation with the HOA board. I compiled every piece of digital evidence, organized testimonials, and prepared my remarks for the upcoming public hearing. This was not just a personal battle. It was a fight for the very soul of our community, a stand for every individual who believed that history and sacrifice should be celebrated rather than dismissed as junk. The stage was set for a showdown that would force the board to confront the undeniable truth. In Cedar Crest, the voice of a hero, no matter how old, could not be silenced by petty enforcement. As the days passed, the digital firestorm that erupted over the incident grew into a full-scale movement. Social media platforms were inundated with posts, videos, and hashtags like hashtag medals not junk, hashtag honor our heroes, and hashtag Cedar Crest United. Neighbors who had long been silenced by the strictures of the HOA began to speak out, sharing their own experiences of arbitrary fines and the stifling of personal expression. Every shared clip of my digital dossier, screenshots of Karen's angry emails, video snippets of her harsh words, and testimonials from proud veterans serve as a rallying point for a community desperate for change. Local news outlets quickly seized on the story. Reporters arrived in Cedar Crest, capturing the raw emotion of residents who described the incident as a wake-up call to the dangers of letting bureaucrats dictate what should be celebrated. "It's not just about war medals," one anchor stated during a live broadcast. "It's about preserving our community's soul and honoring the sacrifices that built this nation." The coverage turned my personal struggle into a broader debate on the value of history, heritage, and individual freedom versus the cold, mechanical enforcement of outdated rules. Within the walls of the HOA board, tension escalated as well. Emergency meetings were held in closed rooms, and leaked minutes painted a picture of a deeply divided group. Some board members, longtime supporters of strict enforcement, argued that the rules must be followed no matter what. Others, swayed by the overwhelming digital evidence and public outcry, began to see that Karen's actions were not only unjust, but a betrayal of the community's true values. Heated debates raged over the future of Cedar Crest. Should we continue down the path of arbitrary fines and conformity, or should we embrace a new era where history and individuality were celebrated? I kept my community updated with every new development. My online posts detailed the board meetings, shared new testimonials from veterans, and even included snippets from a recently released report by a local historian who emphasized the cultural importance of preserving war memorabilia. The digital petition demanding the rescinding of Karen's fines and a full review of the HOA's policies swelled to tens of thousands of signatures. Every shared post, every comment, and every hashtag reinforced the message. Cedar Crest would no longer tolerate the suppression of its heritage. As the final public hearing drew near, the pressure on the HOA board became unbearable. Neighbors organized street rallies, and local community centers buzzed with meetings where the focus was on reclaiming our collective voice. At one rally, a veteran, tears in his eyes, recounted how his own medals had been disrespected by a similar enforcement, urging everyone to stand together against such indignities. The spirit of resistance was palpable. It was a movement driven not by anger alone, but by a deep love for our country and its history. Meanwhile, Karen Miller's own attempts to justify her actions grew increasingly desperate. In a series of poorly produced videos posted on social media, she insisted that her strict enforcement was necessary to maintain order, claiming that my father's display of war medals was outdated and unsightly. But the more she tried to defend her actions, the more the digital evidence and the unified voices of the community exposed her hypocrisy. Her social media accounts were flooded with comments from outraged residents, and local bloggers penned scathing editorials about the absurdity of finding a hero for honoring his past. The final public hearing was set for a crisp, clear morning, and anticipation rippled through Cedar Crest. On the eve of the hearing, I held a small gathering at my home, inviting neighbors, veterans, and supporters to share their thoughts and prepare for the moment of reckoning. The atmosphere was one of determination and hope, a sense that the actions of one narrow-minded enforcer could finally be overturned by the collective will of a community united for justice. By the time the morning of the hearing arrived, the digital dossier I had assembled was a powerful force. Every piece of evidence was neatly organized and ready to be presented. The online petition had reached a record number of signatures, and the voices of countless residents echoed in every tweet and forum post. It was clear that this final hearing was not just a formality. It was the turning point for Cedar Crest. The decisive moment arrived on a cool, brisk morning in a packed boardroom at the Cedar Crest Community Center. The room was filled with HOA officials, local law enforcement representatives, community leaders, and a sea of resolute residents, all gathered for the final public hearing that would determine the future of our community's enforcement policies. With unwavering resolve, Councilwoman Linda Roberts stepped up to the podium, her eyes reflecting the hope and determination of a community that had grown tired of arbitrary fines and outdated standards. After a thorough review of all digital evidence, including time-stamped security footage, detailed logs of fines, and the impassioned testimonies of our residents, we have reached an undeniable conclusion. Councilwoman Roberts began, her voice steady and commanding. It is abundantly clear that the actions taken by Mrs. Karen Miller, specifically her baseless dismissal of our veterans' honors and her arbitrary fining of private property, were not founded on any genuine concern for community aesthetics, but were driven solely by personal bias and a blatant abuse of power. Our community's heritage and our rights as property owners must be upheld. A heavy silence fell over the room as Roberts continued. Effective immediately, the HOA board will rescind all fines related to this incident, and we will initiate a full disciplinary review of the practices that allowed such an egregious violation of our property rights to occur. Furthermore, we will implement new guidelines to protect every resident's right to honor their past and to express themselves freely. Today's decision is not merely about reversing an arbitrary fine. It is a resounding declaration that Cedar Crest stands for truth, justice, and the inalienable right to preserve our heritage. Her words struck a chord, and murmurs of approval rippled throughout the assembly. At that moment, a revered community advocate, known for his unwavering defense of individual freedoms and our nation's history, rose to speak. "Today, we stand united," he declared, his voice ringing with passion. "No resident should ever have their legacy dismissed or their property fined under the guise of outdated rules. Let this vote be the turning point, a clear signal that our community values the sacrifices of our heroes and the right to honor them with dignity. We demand accountability, and we will not rest until every violation of our rights is met with swift, decisive action." His words were met with thunderous applause, uniting everyone in a resolute call for change. Following his address, a senior officer from the local Veterans Liaison Office presented the final dossier, a meticulously compiled record of digital evidence, expert testimonies, and official documents that confirmed the legitimacy and honor of the war medals. The evidence was irrefutable. My father's collection was a testament to decades of sacrifice, and every fine imposed by Karen Miller was a gross injustice. The Internal Affairs panel unanimously endorsed strict disciplinary measures against any abuse of power, and the full report was scheduled for immediate public release. Councilwoman Roberts concluded, "Let this resolution mark the dawn of a new era for Cedar Crest, a community where every resident's heritage is honored, where property rights and personal freedoms are inviolable, and where public authority is exercised with fairness and integrity. Our vote today is a resounding declaration that we will protect our legacy and ensure that no one can impose their narrow views on our community. Together, we stand for justice, transparency, and the right to live with dignity." Her final words, delivered with unwavering conviction, sealed the turning point in our battle for property rights and historical honor. In that defining moment, as every face in the boardroom shone with determination and hope, the balance of power shifted irrevocably. The overwhelming digital evidence and the unified voice of the community forced the HOA board to take decisive action, a turning point that would forever reshape the governance of Cedar Crest. The days of arbitrary fines and the dismissal of true heroism were over, and a future built on respect for individual legacy was finally within our grasp. In the weeks that followed the historic vote, Cedar Crest underwent a profound transformation. News of the rescinded fines and sweeping reforms implemented by the HOA board spread like wildfire through local media and on social networks, igniting impassioned debates about property rights, historical honor, and community governance. Editorials in the local newspaper, with headlines such as "A New Dawn for Cedar Crest" and "Community United for Honor and Freedom," celebrated the decisive actions taken to protect every resident's right to preserve their heritage. Hashtags like #HonorOurHeroes, #NoMoreHBullying, and #LegacyMatters trended widely, reinforcing our collective determination to stand against arbitrary rule enforcement. Town hall meetings and community forums saw a record attendance as residents gathered to share their experiences and to envision a future where individual legacy was celebrated rather than suppressed. Neighbors who had long lived in fear of punitive fines and invasive HOA practices now spoke proudly about their right to honor their past and manage their property as they saw fit. "Our history is our strength," one impassioned resident declared at a bustling meeting, his voice echoing through the packed room. The atmosphere was one of hope and renewal, a promise that Cedar Crest would forever defend the dignity of its residents. Within the reformed HOA board and local public safety departments, swift changes were implemented. Senior officials, led by Director James Carter and Lieutenant Marcus Reed, launched comprehensive training programs on ethical conduct, cultural sensitivity, and the responsible management of community resources. Regular internal audits and transparent disciplinary procedures were established to ensure that every complaint was scrutinized fairly and that no resident would ever again be subjected to arbitrary fines. Our duty is to protect the rights and legacies of every member of our community, Lieutenant Reed affirmed during a follow-up press conference, reinforcing our renewed commitment to justice and integrity. Community leaders and local civil rights organizations mobilized to further empower residents. Workshops, public forums, and educational campaigns were organized to raise awareness about the importance of preserving historical honor and safeguarding personal property rights. When we unite, our voices can preserve the legacy of those who fought for our freedom. A local activist proclaimed at a town hall meeting, inspiring neighbors to join the fight for a more inclusive and respectful governance model. For me, the journey from confrontation to resolution was both deeply personal and profoundly transformative. My decision to stand up against HOA Karen Miller's dismissive fines and to reclaim my father's cherished war medals as a symbol of true heroism had not only restored our family's dignity, but had also ignited a movement that resonated throughout Cedar Crest. Neighbors, once intimidated by the oppressive enforcement of arbitrary rules, found their voices and shared their own stories of resistance. The digital evidence that exposed Karen's disdain became a rallying cry for every resident who believed that our history and sacrifices were not to be discarded as junk. Karen Miller, once the unchallenged enforcer of the HOA's draconian policies, was now reduced to a cautionary tale, a vivid reminder that no one is above accountability when a community stands united for justice. Her influence dwindled as digital records of her past transgressions circulated widely, underscoring the necessity of reform and the importance of honoring true heroism. At a final celebratory event held in the Central Park of Cedar Crest, residents, local officials, and community advocates gathered under the golden glow of the setting sun. A large banner reading, "Unity, Freedom, and Honor," was unfurled between majestic oaks, and heartfelt speeches resonated with promises of a brighter, more inclusive future. Today, we celebrate not just the victory over arbitrary fines, but the triumph of our shared heritage and the right of every veteran to be honored, Councilwoman Roberts proclaimed, her voice strong and unwavering. The standing ovation that followed was a powerful affirmation of our collective commitment to protect our legacies and to ensure that no one can diminish the sacrifices of our heroes. As each new day dawned over Cedar Crest, the legacy of that fateful confrontation endured as a beacon of transformative change. The story of how HOA Karen Miller's dismissive actions against my father's war medals sparked a hero's parade, honored by the mayor and celebrated by an entire community, became a rallying cry for every resident who believed that true honor can never be dismissed as junk. Every sunrise now carried the promise that in Cedar Crest, truth, justice, and the valor of our past would forever shine. In the end, what began as a personal battle evolved into a watershed moment for our entire community. We emerged more united, more vigilant, and more determined to safeguard our heritage and property rights against any form of bureaucratic overreach. And as the sun rose each morning over our reclaimed neighborhood, it carried with it the promise that Cedar Crest would forever be a place where creativity, integrity, and respect for individual legacy were cherished above all else.